blessed. Today we will be learning about a case study that I call Christian dementia. But before we continue, I would like to invite you to the thought process that I used so that you can kind of like follow where my brain is going with this one. I learned this from nursing school, and we have this thought process called SOAP. S for subjective data. And if you've noticed, for the past 3 months, I was asking people, church members, for some questions that I'm picking up any information from you. O for objective data. It could have been like a survey that you can find in the internet, or any kind of information that people will try to look for. Listen to the radio. I did that for 3 months. Look up to the internet. Listen to sermons from Loma Linda University. I tried to look where objective data can be collected, not only just for the Seventh-day Adventist members. A, then you have to analyze what you collected. And then P, you have to plan. And then, after you plan, you have to intervene if you find there is a challenge, a concern, or a problem. And then, E for evaluation, which means that if you did something about that certain concern, you need to reassess yourself if that intervention did really help. A case study of Christian dementia. Is there really such a thing called Christian dementia? The dictionary says that delirium, which is also the acute state of confusion, that's what Satan wants us to have, Babylon, is organically caused by decline from a previously baseline level of mental function. It often varies in severity over a short period of time and includes attention deficits and disorganization of behavior. Now, delirium is not a disease in itself yet, but it's rather a set of symptoms, signs, that kind of lead us to the most chronic problem, which is dementia. Because dementia is a broad category of brain disease that cause a long-term and often gradual decrease in the ability to think and remember that is great enough to affect a person's daily functioning. To remember that affects our daily functioning. I have been studying. When I was given the date to preach, my first prayer was, Lord, help me pick up a message. And when I went home, the first book I saw was a morning devotional entitled Lest We Forgot, or Lest We Forget. And then for 3 months, I have been kind of like just getting my mind into the word, lest we forget. And as Christians, it is really easy to forget. And before we continue, let's bow our heads to ask the Lord's guidance and His Holy Spirit to guide us today. Lord, here are your children. We humbly come to your presence today, Lord, with open hearts and minds to hear what you have to say to each one of us. And may we learn from it, Lord, and may we do something about it so that we will not suffer what we call Christian dementia. In Christ's name we pray. I came to work one night. A patient was just brought in his room after 6-8 hours of procedure. It started with just a simple chest discomfort. But for many years, the patient has been trying to ignore the signs and the symptoms. And as he was admitted to the emergency room, they found out that he had a massive heart attack. The doctors tried to see how extensive the problem was when they did the angiogram. And as they looked, they saw multiple vessels of coronary artery that has been blocked with plaque. Plaque that has been building up for many years. That they recommended an emergent bypass. As the patient was flown in from New Mexico to UMC, the OR team was notified and prepared for the procedure. When the patient was in the table, not much of all the physical or examination that has been done since it was an emergent one. And the doctors did not know all the details about the patient's medical history. The moment they hooked up the patient to the bypass machine, it threw little plaques that came from a carotid artery stenosis from the past that caused him to have this what they call watershed stroke, where little plaques have been blocking all those little arteries in the brain. That even though he was not with anesthesia anymore, he had a hard time waking up, and half of his body was paralyzed. And during the operation, since he had that massive heart attack, like most of his heart was dead cells, that to compensate with the shock, his brain would try to stimulate his heart to beat faster, making his heart go into that arrhythmia called ventricular tachycardia, a deadly one if not treated right. So they have to shock him out of that deadly rhythm before they can even continue the procedure. The heart was so messed up, it's just pumping at least 10%, what is supposed to pump at least 60 to 80%. He came back to his room, and for the first time, the wife saw her husband after 24 hours of waiting with anticipation to know how her husband is doing. He came in a room with a tube hanging out from his husband's mouth, connected to a mechanical ventilator to help with the breathing part. A pacemaker box with wires connected to his chest just to keep that heart in rhythm. And throughout the procedure, because the procedure was so long, it also affected the perfusion to his kidneys, that he needed a hemodialysis machine to just kind of like help regulate his blood when it comes to electrolytes and toxins. Pumps with drips, chemical drips, that just try to stimulate every cell in the body to keep him alive. In this very moment, as tears rolled down the wife's face, cheeks, he looked at me, she looked at me, and said, "I don't know how you do it, but I thank you for everything that you do." You can see that she was holding herself, trying to control. As she went out, she met the surgeon, a familiar face, who she gave trust. And at this very moment, she couldn't handle. Her knees just became so weak, and she cried so hard. And she begged the doctor to do everything in his power to save her husband. In silence, I sat down and I scanned the room for one more time. And then I asked myself, is there really anything more that we can do for this patient? Is there anything else that man can do with this kind of situation? Our Christian life is in that same scenario right now. We are in the brink of dying spiritually. But God did not purpose in his heart, nor he desired that each one of us will suffer that same faith. And so he devised kind of like the problem that he did, or it's not a problem, he devised a plan for each one of us to be saved in that very moment when we are dying in our faith. And today, let me share with you the 3 symptoms of Christian dementia. Each symptom has to build up from one point to the other. And the first symptom is, who is God? If that first question becomes your problem, then everything from there will fall apart. Because God did not make it to a point that we will suffer what we are suffering right now. God made man upright. He gave him noble traits of character with no bias towards evil. He endowed him with high intellectual powers and presented before him the strongest possible inducements to be true to his allegiance. Obedience, perfect and perpetual, was the condition of eternal happiness. On this condition, he was to have access to the tree of life. The problem with Alzheimer's disease is that as it progresses in a long time, our brain's neurons have this connection with each other to transmit information. And as they grow, plaques build up around that connections. And as plaque build up, it gets tangled. And as it gets tangled, it's not getting enough nutrients, oxygen, until those neurons starts to die. Same scenario with our little spiritual life. The moment we get that sin, that plaque between our connection with our God, our lives will get entangled with a mess we can never fix. And we start to die. Adam had enjoyed the companionship of God and of holy angels. He had looked upon glory of the Creator. He understood the high destiny open to the human race should they remain faithful to God. And that's the reason why the first symptom of Christian dementia is the question, what did you say again? Who is God? A Gallup survey was asking people around and asking, do you believe in God? And 92% said yes, responded yes. But if they were given a different option, like, do you believe in spiritual beings or other than a God? Then that 92% dropped down 12%. That was in 2011. In 2016, the same survey was done, and this time, 3% more dropped down from that survey. Barna Group, an evangelical Christian polling firm, made another survey. Same survey if you believe in God, but this time focusing on each generation. And they found out that in this generation, Generation Z, they found out that atheism had doubled in number. People who don't believe in God had doubled in number. What's more troubling is people, when they are answering form, they would try to go into that, what spiritual or what religious denomination do you belong? And this group has been increasing as well. The rise of the nuns. People try to check that part, none. Not only do they not believe in God anymore, and they also don't belong to any denomination. Disturbing, but true. And every time you talk with them, you will hear them says, I'm very busy. I don't have time for God in my life. Obeying what God wants me to do just doesn't make sense anymore. It doesn't make application in the real world where I work or I play. I don't need God in my life. Or so I don't need anyone to help me. I can do it myself. I am self-sufficient. You see, the problem with Christians and man, when we come to that point that we think we are God and we don't need God in our lives, then that's when the first symptom of Christian dementia starts to bother us. The Bible is very clear with the consequences man has to suffer if they don't have God in our lives. And the children of Israel did what? Evil in the sight of the Lord because they forgot the Lord their God. Jeremiah wrote, for my people are foolish because they have not known me. They bend their tongue like a bow, falsehood and not truth has grown strong in the land, for they proceed from evil to evil, and they do not know me, declares the Lord. Hosea, they do not direct their deeds toward turning to their God, for the spirit of harlotry is in their midst, and they do not know the Lord. Vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened, who changed the truth of God into a lie. They did not like to retain God in their knowledge. Forgetting and disobeying God leads to the next symptom of our Christian dementia. And that is, who am I again? When we ask our patients that are confused, we kind of keep on repeating that. What's your name? When is your birth date? Do you know why you're here? Moses, after a long time in exile, probably kind of like was wavering and still are not sure what to do with his life until he met God for the first time in a burning bush. And God has to remind Moses. He said like, Moses, remove your sandals, for where you're standing is a holy ground. I am the God of your fathers. I am the God of Abraham. I am the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And when Moses heard that, he hid himself. He hid his face because he cannot face God with His glory. When God asked Him to free His children from bondage, listen what He said in Exodus chapter 3, verse 11. But Moses said to God, "Who am I, that I should go to Pharaoh and that I should bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? And if they ask me, what is your name, or what is his name, what shall I say to them?" You see, when you forgot God, you forgot who you are. Your self-worth is not as much as when you have God in your life. No hope. No answers to our problems and concerns. It has to be that God is present in our life. And if that is the case, then we will know who we really are. For some reason, Moses had felt unworthy for such a calling. I felt the same way too. I grew up insecure. I focused my eyes into the things that I can never have when my mom died. And every time I think of reasons why this life is unfair, I pile it up, stack it up, and as high as it can go, that's also how far I am going away from God. Then I met Mila. That was a problem. Yante, you can ask her. The reason why I said it was a problem is because this was the first time that I was able to feel being loved. I didn't know what to do with it. I don't know how to respond to it. Being loved, I was so mean to her. I was sarcastic most of the time. I was rude. And every time we meet, it becomes not joyful because we end up just quarreling and arguing. And I even wanted to get out of the relationship as soon as I can. I'd like to run away from it. I could not handle the idea of love. And my response to it was something that bothers me, and it was a problem. But all those years, she never let go of me. She showed me love and grace. And her friends would tell me that she had been praying for me every night. For years, my escape mechanism, losing my mom, is just don't get into a close relationship with people. Just don't build just build a wall. Distance yourself so that if you lose them, you don't feel as much pain. My father died last year. In her deathbed, his last wish was he desired to see me. He wanted to talk to me for the last time in his life before he go. For all the memories that I have with him, I think I came to believe that I was the favorite son. So I thought, right? Firstborn. Everywhere he would go, I would go. Everything that he'd do, I am there because he wanted me close to him. He would teach me everything that he knew. Singing. He even taught me my first sermon when I was 7 years old. But for some reason, depression hit him that, well, I don't know what happened in 25 years. No communication, not even a letter or a call from him. I didn't know what happened to him or where he is, and I didn't even bother to know. That relationship was cut off long, long time ago. I didn't go and see him for the last time. I had a good reason. I didn't have a passport. So I said to myself, but as I kept on thinking about it, there was one specific reason, or a lot, that kept on piling up in my head. What am I going to say to him? What are we going to talk about? It has been 25 years since I heard his voice. I don't even know or remember his face anymore. Am I ready to open up my life again to invite him in that life that he was not part of it for a long, long time? And even if he died last year, that feeling was, there's not even emotion involved anymore. If we have been away from God for that long, you will come to that point that you won't even have emotion for God. Same as what I have experienced with my dad. You won't know his voice. You won't even know his face. You won't even listen if he tells you what to do anymore. Because we have been separated from God for the longest time. Without God, we are nothing. And if we are nothing, then the third symptom that comes into play is the symptom that says, then why am I here again? The question that I have been burdened for these 3 months is not on what to know my personal purpose in life, but to know what we as a church purpose in life. Are we here in Lubbock as Seventh-day Adventists because we have a mission to accomplish? Are we right here, right now, with that desire in our hearts to not only receive God in our life, but actually make God real to others? And that is one of the researches about dementia. They found out that even though a lot has been given into the account of genetics, they found out that there are ways wherein you can prevent pretty much all these symptoms. And the 3 main reasons they found out is that, one, we need, as members, to have good, enough time of rest. And then, second would be nutrition, healthy food. And the third one is they found out that building meaningful memories is the key to avoiding most of the symptoms that dementia will hit us 20 to 30 years from now. Look at the person on your right. Now look at the person on your left. They said that one of you, or one of us, will either have dementia after 20 years, or maybe we will be taking care of the person who has dementia. But let me share with you what Ellen White said on what is the condition of Christian dementia. She said, "It is a solemn statement that I make to the church that not one in how many? 20 is prepared, whose names are registered upon the church books, are prepared to close their earthly history and would be as verily without God and without hope in the world as a common sinner." Not one out of 20. If that is the case of the Lubbock Seventh-day Adventist Church, this church is doomed to suffer. Now, the analysis data has been presented. Would you agree to me that one form or the other, we might be experiencing the symptoms of early Christian dementia? And if we agree with that one, what are we going to do about it? You see, God knew that man will be in this predicament. God knew from the beginning that we will be in this hole. We will be in a moment, in a situation wherein we are grabbing our last breath before we die spiritually. And so He made a plan, the plan of redemption. And He said that before we even sin, God has already saved us. But you see, that is a message. I was talking with Miss Dorothy, Ted, Miss Kathy the other night, and they were saying that you can go around Lubbock and attend every church, and they will be preaching about salvation by faith, the plan of redemption. Yes, they might even give a better sermon than what we have. But what is missing in this church is that we are not justified. We are in the growing process to be sanctified. We are chosen people, holy nation, a royal priesthood. That if we have God in our lives and we know who we really are as children of God, then it is our desire in our hearts to not only hold that truth to ourselves, but to preach it and share it. And make that truth real. Make Christ real, not only to me, but to everyone that I talk to. One of the answers of God was to give the 10 Commandments. And if you noticed, He knew the problem. And He started with 4 commandments that has to do with who is God. We may claim that we have been following the 4th commandment. We may claim that we have been following the 1st commandment, thou shalt have no other gods before me. But there is 2 commandments that actually Seventh-day Adventists and me have been growing into that demented part of our faith. You see, the 2nd commandment has to do with idolatry, graven image. As I was listening to Pastor Randy Roberts, he was talking about worship. And then there was a story that I was really like hooked up. And I had to rewind and rewind and rewind just to get the idea. And the idea was there was a radio announcer who posted a question that if you are given $2 million and you will not have any connection to sports, you're not listening to radios, you're not watching sports, you're not doing anything that is related to sports for 2 years, would you give up sports? And one of the listeners called in and said that not even for $25 million And here's what is kind of like bugging, because he said sports is everywhere I go has to do has been surrounding everything that I do. Isn't that what we call idolatry? But then the question for Christians is that, what have we been doing? And what is our response when we say, I'm too busy to be involved in church? Everything, everywhere that I go, it surrounds everything that I do. And if responsibilities also tend to surround everything that I do, then it becomes as well idolatry. The third commandment also says about do not use the name of God in vain. And as Seventh-day Adventists, how many times do we carry the mission of the three angels' message, the truth about eating healthy and nutrition, the truth about the Sabbath, the truth about heavenly sanctuary, and yet, when it comes to our personal lives, does it really show that we're not taking the name of the Lord, our God, in vain? God's answer to who I am is by giving Christ. Is by giving and remembering that cross in that Mount of Calvary. But here is the thing that I would share to you today. How can we make meaningful memories with our God? Let me share with you for the last 5 minutes. And this story, the Shunammite woman, you see, I ended up with my life lost, right? The first part, who I am. Let me share with you one thing that changed my life completely. And that is when I started to look back and try to find God. And the story of the Shunammite woman was my kind of like favorite one. And you know why? Because the one that I have been missing is what? The mother part, right? So I was hooked up to it, and every time I read it, there's a lot of new lessons coming from it. The story started with Elisha. Now hear me out here, brothers and sisters, because this is a challenge. The story started with Elisha. Now, Elisha was actually described by the Shunammite woman as what? A holy man of God. I am calling to all the leaders of this church, men, fathers, uncles, young men. We need to be like Elisha, to be seen as a holy man of God. We should even have the same prayer as Elisha prayed when he was getting the pass on from Elijah's generation. He said, like, I pray for a double portion of your spirit. Men, we need that double portion in our life. I was asking Miss Dorothy the other night and said, like, what have you been missing? Or what made Lubbock Seventh-day Adventists grow to such a big church right now? And one thing that I admired with what she said is that we had men, not only who were strong with their leadership skills, but they were strong in their faith and knew God. They were considered holy men of God. That every time Elisha passes by through that house of the Shunammite woman, she knew and she told her husband that truly this is a holy man of God. Now the woman, the Shunammite woman, was considered noble, rich. And I would say she is rich not only in material things, but she was so generous in her heart. As I was growing in my faith, if you notice, one of the songs was "What a Friend We Have in Jesus." You see, if I rewind my life to the time I lost my mom and try to look at a different direction this time, then I realized that God was all along there with me. The first one is my neighbor. She was, I would say, a holy woman of God. I spend most of my time and my dad is away at work. She teaches me a little bit of piano here and there, but I was not so interested in that. But one time, her house burned down. And half of her face was burnt. Her fingers and hands were burned as well. That every time she moves those fingers, tears will just roll down her eyes because of the pain. I visited her after the incident, after she was out of the hospital. And then I looked up in her face as she was singing the song, "What a Friend We Have in Jesus." For my wee mind that time, I looked at her and asked her, "Why are you crying when you're singing that song, What a Friend We Have in Jesus?" And she told me that every time she opens her mouth, every time she plays the piano, as she moves her fingers, she feels that pain. But she never minded the pain because she had a friend in Jesus. God was so meaningful to her that no matter the pain, no matter how she will look like, she was willing to sing praises to God. We need to find a song for each and everything that we experience in life. I had a song if I am discouraged. I have a song when I wake up in the morning that my mom would always sing first thing in the morning. I come to the garden to pray. I knew that my mom will be praying if I hear that song. Every song, even though you're not singing, every song, you need to kind of like just memorize the lyrics and make it meaningful to your life. Make it connect on where and when it is meaningful to you. The same thing with prayer as well. Make your prayer so meaningful that you will be able to share with your kids. Every time you have a problem, oh, let's pray about this and ask God. How can we make God meaningful in our lives? And they said that if you have 10 memories about God and then dementia kicks in, at least you have 5 left, and that will still keep that connection flowing. God gave us the doctrine of the heavenly sanctuary, and there you can find the table of shewbread, which is God's word, the altar of burnt incense, which is the fervent prayer of the saints that is not ceasing, and our lives showing and glowing with God's glory. Who is God? He is He whom we give glory, honor, and praise. Who am I? Grant us, Lord, grace, mercy, and peace. And why we are here? We are here because we are Seventh-day Adventists. We hold on to the truth that we need to share and make sure that our voices will be heard. Not because we want to praise ourselves, but because we know God. We have a meaningful relationship with our God. And then people will know that you are a holy man of God, and that they will make way, that they will invite us to their homes so that we can share God's love to them and make that meaningful relationship with them as well. A challenge for you today is actually an appeal song from the Grace Notes Quartet. We couldn't help it but sing something that is so meaningful to us. And that song was, I Believe in a Hill Called Mount Calvary, where God gave His only begotten Son